Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being here at 5:30. I will start with an apology. First of all, the first part of the talk is the most boring part, and it's at 5:30. But if you can stay until the end, tomorrow you will have nice examples. So, and the second apology is that I will follow a point of view which is a deterministic point of view. So for all people who do stochastic, believe me, it means that what you do is over me, in the sense that at the last slide I will show you that actually if you rethink everything in a stochastic point of view, then you can have more general results maybe. But already with a deterministic point of view, I think with 1 hour and a half it will be quite a challenge. And so last apology, excuse me Bertrand, if I'm too long, but I will stop at 7. Okay, so outline. Don't look at it too, okay, so it's very long. I will mainly talk about Kalman filtering, and my idea is to show you that Kalman is a tool to do inverse problems. And to go up to that, we will need a few tools to work with. So let's first start with some recalls on the inverse problem. So just to set up the notation. So the notation, I wrote them here. So the idea is that I have a measurement, Z, an observation, so something given by a guy who would do experiments. And I want to recover a variable called Y that I call the state of something. Okay? And for this lecture, I will consider that the state is in a Hilbert space, and the observations are also in the Hilbert space. And you remember what is a well-posed problem. What you need is injectivity, surjectivity, and basically what you expect when you do an inverse problem. So it's an inverse problem in the sense that you will have to inverse psi. So it's really just a point of view. Because every inverse problem is a direct problem of the inverse. So you have to remember that we will inverse psi, and so what we expect is that to be somehow continuous with respect to the data, meaning that when the measurements are close, you expect the state to be close. And if it's not, you will call that a Hill-Post problem. Okay? Somehow people say that all the inverse problems are the problems which are Hill-Post. But actually, we will see that it's not exactly that. I will start with a quite simple example, which is a transport equation, not so far from biology, actually far from biology. It's a transport equation that you can write when you are looking for example, depolymerization problem. So it's the density, you depolymerize, and you have this transport equation. Why it's not far from the biology is when you look at the measurements that we look at, which are the moments of the density, for example, the first, the second, or moments. So let's write in, so the question is, can I recover the initial condition associated to this transport equation when I measure mu k? So if I choose, for example, 1 k, so I say I have just one moment, I can write very easily what is psi. So I just write here what is the measurements, then I use the characteristic equation, and I get this expression. So if I derive psi, I can recover u0. Okay? So quite simple and quite representative of what we have when we look at inverse problems. So let me show you. It's like super easy. You have this, and you measure the different moments with possibly some noises on that. Okay? And then the question is, if can I recover from this the initial condition? And the answer is, when you look at the previous formula, it should be quite nice. Actually, it's not completely nice because you have to derive with respect to time to get u0 from psi. So the image of psi is hk plus 1, depending of the moment that you look at. Okay, meaning that if I give you a mu, which is not in hk, then when you will try to derive it, you will have a problem that you will increase the noise. So this is a typical problem of surjectivity, okay? I give you an observation which is not in the good space, and so you have difficulty to inverse it. So typically, from a mathematical point of view, we said that psi is, actually you can prove that psi is compact with dense image. It's injective, but not surjective, okay? So you will have problem for that. Actually, so this is the typical problem in inverse problem. It's a problem of surjectivity. Okay, I give you observations which are not in the good space. You inverse, you blow up the noise. Okay? What I will show you is that actually in let's say, most of the problem that I'm looking at, my first problem is injectivity, meaning that sometimes I don't have enough information in the data so that I can recover something. And you see it when we go back to that. For example, if you look at this first, the moment of order 0, if you do not wait a long time enough, you don't see anything. Okay? Because to see something on the first moment, you have to escape from the window so that the shape of the function changes so that you can actually invert something. So here here we have this condition, which is it's not even injective when the time is not long enough. Okay, so it's a very simple example of problem of subjectivity and injectivity. Okay. Okay. How do you solve this type of problems? Actually, so in this first talk, I will only speak about one type of approach, which is the most simplest actually approach, which is a least square approach. Okay, so something very well known, simple, etc. What is nice is to see how least square approaches can be related to Kalman approaches. So if you want to do a least square approach on that, what you do is that you minimize a J, which is a criteria that involves the discrepancy between the data that I will give you, that the experimentalist will give you, and the psi. And you add a regularization term, which says that you look at for y, which is not so far from this y diamond. Okay, so very often y diamond is 0. Okay, so and this is quite, which is very easy. It's like correspond to Tikhonov regularization. Okay. One important aspect, so, and then you put some weights here, saying that you expect y to be not far from y diamond with respect to alpha, and you expect the measurements to be noisy with a magnitude of order delta. Okay, so you weight the two norms in order to balance the two types of information that you have. Okay, and to simplify the notation, I will always use a weighted norm, which is when I will write something like that. for example, the second one, it will mean Z R Z, and R, for example, you choose that. Okay, but you can choose maybe a most clever operator than just the identity. You have like lots of possibility here. And for that, I use the general notation with R. Okay, so so lambda and R are weight operators in order to reset the norms. And so you minimize that, so you write the optimality condition. So you do some differential calculus here. And on that part, you see here the differential of psi, okay, if it's nonlinear. And in the linear case, you get that, okay, which is in order to give an estimate, which is y bar, you just have to inverse this operator. If psi is not invertible, because it's not injective or surjective, then you get a little bit, you compensate by this term. Yeah?
Why do you look at z power delta minus psi of...
It's not a power, it's like just an index. Okay. Yeah, you're right, sorry. Just an index to say that, okay. So, yeah, missing notation. So, these correspond to an observation. So when I need something which is in the space big Z, I call it Z. But if I look at a real observation, I will call it Z delta, just to say it's Z with additional noise in it. Okay, not necessarily a real an observation that corresponds to a specific Y. Okay, sorry. And okay, so it's like, yeah.
Can you make it clear what is Y diamond?
Like your, it's called, you can call it an a priori on the state. So if you don't have any a priori, which is good, then you set 0. But for example, if I look on the density of something, maybe it's not so clever to think that this density that I'm looking at is 0. So sometimes you can already set up something, for example, a Gaussian somewhere, and you find with respect to the discrepancy with respect to this Gaussian. Okay. So somehow you can say that this is information from the data space, and Y diamond is information from the modeling space, from the knowledge space, that you already know something on what you are looking at. Okay? Okay. And okay, so more general cases can be found in the literature, and the practical algorithm is called the gradient descent method, which corresponds to computing the gradient of J, already shown in the previous slide, then to choose a relaxation term, and then to iterate from your a priori. So you start from Y diamond, okay, and then you try to iterate in order to recover the good solution. And there is ways to find a relaxation term here, which are very well known in the literature. For example, for a case where psi is compact with a dense image, you can compute the SVD of psi, and then you can choose the raw parameters with respect to the first eigenvalue of the SVD of psi. That's are very well known in the inverse problem books, which is, it doesn't mean that it's easy. It means that you can find them. And I will try to talk about things that actually are not as well developed in the literature. Okay. Singular value decomposition of the operator. So you look at the eigenvalue of psi star psi, and then you choose the first one, and you look at one. Okay.
I have another question about the a priori Y diamond.
Yeah.
Okay. course, I would like Y diamond to be close to the inverse, so to be such that the psi of Y diamond is close to Z. Is it possible to choose Y diamond in a logical way? I know. Say Y diamond in a small class, or you speak of a Gaussian distribution, this is the best Gaussian distribution, or it's just irrelevant to...
For me, the idea is to separate what you can find from all the knowledge that you can have, so from books, and what you can have from experiments. Okay, so Y diamond, it's all the idea that you can have on the system that you, for example, when we look at physiological systems, we know that parameters are in certain ranges. When we look at initial condition for like the heart, we know that it's not 0, for example, etc., etc. But then if you say, can I find it from my specific inverse problems, then I say you are already cheating with the inverse problem. Okay, so let's move to an original game, which is you speak with an experimentalist that gives you each day a new measurements for your problem. So you just learn how to do an inverse problems, you know the formula, you do, for example, the gradient descent method, and the day after, he comes back and he says, actually, I have a new measurement for you, for your system, okay? So what do you do? First ID, you keep the first estimation. Second ID, you drop the first estimation and you start again. Okay? Third ID, you use both. Okay? To complement your observability on the system. Okay? But then, the third day, you come back with a third observation. And then a new one, and then a new one, and then a new one. And each day, your problem is bigger because you have to, you start with an observation at the first day, but then at the second day, your observation is something like that. And then Z0, Zn. So you have to, at day n, you have to inverse something like that. Actually, you see that I put the a priori in this Z, meaning that the a priori for me it's another source of information, which is not, strictly speaking, a measurement, but for an information point of view, it's the same type of object. So I put everything like that here, and psi, what I want to inverse is a psi. And actually, because I have one here, my psi is invertible, so it's injective and surjective. Okay, because I already have the identity here. Here is the weight operator that is like bigger every day. And if I do the least square estimation, so LSE, least square estimation, I get this formula, okay? And you could be happy with that. So every day you start again, and you use this formula. I'm in a linear case, so I'm using this formula, and then I get my estimation. What I will show you is that there is a nice way to see that by saying I don't want to redo everything every day. I just want to use the last measurements to get something, to improve my estimation. So for that, I use a quite classical lemma, which is the inversion lemma. So obvious condition, because when you see a -1, meaning that the operator is invertible. And from this lemma, if I define pi, sorry, I lose my, okay. If I, if I define pi n as the inverse of this operator, so I define some kind of recursive, recursive relation here. So, like, it's a definition. I define pi n like this, recursively. I use the inversion lemma to get this inversion formula, and then it's just like very simple computation, but you can prove that you can write yn, so the estimator at time n, as the previous estimator plus a correction that is applied to only the last one, the last observation that you get, minus what you will get from the previous estimation. Okay, so you use the previous estimation, you look at what you recover as an observation, you compare it to the new observation, and you just correct the previous estimation. So this is called a recursive estimation, because every day you don't recompute everything, you compute only with the new information. Okay? And it's the key of what I will present you during now 1 hour. Okay? How to reset everything so that everything can be synced as a recursive estimation. So when you get a new observation, you use it, and you don't recompute everything. Okay? So the idea is that you need to compute this gain. So G is called a gain because it compensates what you have in your previous estimation with a new source of information. And there is a recursive way to compute the gain from this, typically from this formula. Okay? So now you know how to do inverse problems with least square approaches for one observation or for multiple observations. Okay? And now we will talk about data assimilation. Who knows what is data assimilation? Actually, I don't even know what is data assimilation. So data assimilation is a word, like 2 words actually. It's 2 words that comes from the 70s and from a specific community, which is people who do weather forecasting. Okay? Basically what they have is that they have the history of the weather and they want to predict the weather for a new day. And for that, they say, my model is not perfect, so I want to recover to estimate different elements in my models, for example, initial condition parameters, so that correspond to the data that I have, the history of the data. And then my model will be well fit with this data so that I can predict one new day. Okay? And from this community comes the word data assimilation, meaning that I assimilate data in the model in order to do better predictions. And what I will try to show you today is a way to think of data assimilation as a least square estimation problem in a quite deterministic point of view. So data assimilation for me is the inverse problems that correspond to evolution systems. So here is how I formulate it. I need a dynamical system, so the weather, the climate, heart beating, a fluid structure interaction problem, things like that. My transport equation, so I need an evolution equation, and I will write it in this very general form, and then we will discuss finite dimensional problem, infinite dimensional problem, linear problem, nonlinear problems, etc. And then comes the fun. So I write it in a very general form, and I say, so Y is the state of my system. A is the dynamics operator. We will discuss that. And I start from an initial condition, which is Y diamond, an a priori, plus something that I don't know, zeta. Okay? And B, I know it, but nu, I don't know it. Okay? It's what I called a model error. Okay? There is very different way to introduce a model error. This is the simplest one, because actually, even if my system is possibly nonlinear, I will say that the model error is linear, and it's already difficult like that, so we will stay with that. Okay? So some a priori on what we have here. We will say that on this class of system, so this system is parameterized by zeta and nu. If I give you zeta and nu, then you can compute the dynamics. Okay? And we will say that we have a target trajectory, which is the real weather, the real climate, my real heartbeat, okay? And I will call Ch, Y, the target trajectory. I don't know the target trajectory because I don't know the initial condition for this target trajectory, and I don't know the model error for this target trajectory. What I will know is that actually I have an order of magnitude of the error between the initial condition and the target trajectory, which is bounded by alpha. And basically, I will say that the order of magnitude of that is beta. So that's the first part, that's the modeling part. On this part, I have people who do measurements, okay? So they are on the Z space, and they give me measurements, Z indexed by delta, and actually they do experiments, but they also do modeling. What they model is the experiment. So they give me an operator that say how to measure something from the state. For example, in weather forecasting, they say, I measure the pressure somewhere. I measure the velocity somewhere. For the heart, they say, I measure the displacement somewhere, etc. So you can model, as you model the dynamics, you can model the process of measuring something. Sometimes it's as hard to model this than this, okay? But we will say that we have these two operators. And this is the noise, and the order of magnitude of the noise for the target trajectory is bounded by delta. Okay? So now, let's do least square estimation on this system. So what you are looking at is this guy and this guy. So you go back to the previous problem, you try to find the psi, so the operator to be inverted, and psi comes from the space zeta nu and give you the observation. Okay, so psi is the combination of the C operator we observe and the dynamics. And then you minimize over this combination of unknown parameters, unknown quantities, sorry, and you minimize the criteria, which is the regularization term plus the discrepancy with respect to the data. Yeah?
What is U?
U is where the new live. Actually, it's not Q, it's U. Thank you. This belongs to you. Okay? Lots of notation, actually, and I did some thinking about the notation. And so what is unknown is always Greek letters, so very smart from my point of view. And yeah, and then Y is in Y, Z is in Z, and U is in U. Okay, and okay, so you write this, and then you just develop what it means. What it means is that when you say what this means, it means that what you are minimizing is you're minimizing over zeta and nu, something which combine an error on nu, on the zeta. Remember that zeta y0 is y diamond plus zeta. Okay, so zeta you expect to be close to, you expect that his mean value somehow is 0, so you don't have any zeta diamond here. Zeta diamond is 0 somehow. Then you have nu, and then you have the discrepancy between the data and what you can regenerate from the trajectory when using the observation operator. And since you have data all over time, now you have to integrate all over time. Okay? And since the model error is all over time, you also have to integrate. Okay? So data assimilation is like, the first time you think about data assimilation is like, I'm doing least square estimation, but since I have things involved in time, but then I have to integrate over time all the information. Okay? This is very general. You can think that all the operators can be time dependent. This formalism encompasses identification problems. So if I have a system when I want to identify parameters, I can't rewrite everything by saying that I have this y flat, natural, so let's say big Y. Let's call it big Y, which combine the Y and the parameters. And on the parameters, you add the fact that since there are parameters, they don't move with respect to time. So you add these dynamics, okay? And then you just have to rethink the problem before with respect to this variable. Observation can have a more complex structure because now I always compute something which is z minus c of y. But we will see tomorrow that actually sometimes when you are in the observation space, you don't have a minus way to compute differences. So sometimes you have to rethink everything because you cannot really compare things like that. So we will say that in the observation space, there is a way to comparing data and y, which is called J. Okay, so J for now plays the role of that, and we will see tomorrow situation where actually there is no minus here. And then I wrote everything as a continuous time problem, but actually everything can be discrete time, and we will see how it works.
Question about
Yeah.
the D.
Yeah.
It didn't appear in your minimization problem?
Yeah, actually.
Some structure about the...
No, actually, yeah. Actually, it appears because this minimization is under the constraint of the dynamics, meaning that y is solution of the dynamics. So y is solution of y dot equal, so you have y dot equal way of y plus, so it appears there, here, somehow, but indirectly. Okay? You will see it in the minimization, you will see it reappear.
B is the identity, it means that you minimize the difference between y dot and
Yeah. But sometimes you know that the model error, yeah, there is.
you know something.
Yeah, sometimes you know something. You know that you have zero boundary condition, for example. So B, then it's not, is restricted to the other part, etc. Other aspect, so linear versus nonlinear. Not that everything can be very quickly nonlinear, because if you look at identification problem, okay, even if your model depend linearly from the parameters, then the complete system, like the augmented system, will be at least bilinear between y and theta, even if theta, the dependence of the model is linear. For example, if I say that I want to identify, in the first problem I want to identify, so I want to identify that, so then I add that, but the problem in U new is nonlinear, okay? Because the U solution depends nonlinearly on U. Okay, so everything can be very quickly nonlinear, and for now everything is formal. You have to choose spaces to do the minimization. So we will have to decide in what type of spaces we expect the solution of the dynamics. So for example, L2, maybe continuous, maybe C1, maybe absolutely continuous, maybe H1. So we will have to decide, okay? And last problem, so everything, the devil is in the detail. Last problem, A, B, C. Essentially, if you are in finite dimension, everything is okay, it's bounded. But if you go to PDEs, then it's unbounded. And then you get new problems. Okay? So I will try to show you in a finite dimension settings what can be done, and I will try then to show you what extensions are needed for PDEs. Okay? So first approach, we will try to find the minimum of this least square criteria. So for that, basically the idea is to define a Lagrangian, because you have a constraint which is the dynamics. So for those who are not very used to use the Lagrangian, basically the idea is that this is a constraint, this should be 0, and Q play the role of a Lagrange multiplier. And when you minimize, when you take the sup over this part, you enforce actually this to be 0. Okay? So Y now is not constrained anymore, so Y can be anything in your space, and the constraint will be enforced by that. And so basically you look at the saddle point of this guy, and so you write the optimality condition for this Lagrangian. And if you look at the optimality condition with respect to Y, you get an equation on Q, which is called the adjoint equation of the problem. I wrote it in the very general nonlinear way, and you will get the slide. But we will see a more simpler version when everything is linear. So first you get this equation. Then you play with the boundary condition, and you get a boundary condition for this adjoint variable. You play, and you get a link between what you are looking at, which is the estimation of the initial condition with respect to this adjoint variable. You find the new bar, which is the new that you are looking at from the adjoint variable. So everything you can write it with respect to the adjoint variable. So basically, this is what you get. You get what we call a two ends dynamics, because you get an equation for Y, okay, with a good initial condition, and you get but to compute this equation on Y, you have an equation on Q. The problem is that the equation on Q starts from the final time. Okay, so it was like almost perfect, which is you minimize, you find your estimated trajectory, but to compute this estimated trajectory, you need a variable that's to be computed needs to be the initial condition is actually a final condition, and in Q actually you have Y, so everything is coupled. So yeah, you are doomed. Okay. So when you see something like that, do you have an idea on how you will solve your problem? So this is the optimality system. Basically, when you see something like that, what you say is that you will not be able to find directly this guy. So what you will do is to iterate. So you start from an initial condition so you start from, for example, Q bar is equal to 0, then you compute that, then you go back using Q, then you compute that, then you go back, you compute that, etc., until convergence. Actually, this iterative process, you can prove it that it corresponds exactly to doing a gradient descent over the criteria. Okay? So iterate, direct adjoint correspond to, allows you to minimize by following a gradient descent method. Let me maybe show you what do you have in the linear case. So the criteria reads something like that. Everything is linear. Actually, in this case, you can prove that you have a quadratic functional, so everything is well posed. You have there exists one and only one optimal estimation, and the optimal system then reads like that. In the nonlinear case, basically you can't prove anything. Okay, what you can do is just do your algorithm and cross your finger in order to find a good estimation. Actually, you will not. You will go until you reach a minimum, a local minimum, and then you are stuck there. And you will say that this is your estimation, okay? But in the linear case, everything is nice, you get your estimation. Okay, and it works perfectly. Actually, it works perfectly. So I go back to my previous problem of estimating my initial condition from one moment. So from the first moment, I get, when I don't have any error in my observation, I get that. So first moment of order 0, or order 1, order 2, and then I add some measurement error. So it's epsilon, but it should be delta. And you get reconstruction here, because actually it's logical. You, as before, it's not surjective. So when you compute the minimum, then you blow up the noise. Okay? So that's completely normal. There is no magic. It's just, I just show you another way to solve the same problem as for the first slide, but you have the same problems. Okay? And you can say I'm not happy with that because it should be a density, and I get negative value. You can think of a lot of ways to ameliorate this, but actually just to show you that this minimization works. Yeah.
Yeah, just a question for the colors. So what is the
noise? Yeah, sorry. So
noise is green, or?
Yeah, green is the reconstructed, and blue is the target one. Okay, and the other ones, sorry, are not useful. Okay, so yeah, I could stop there and say that's basically what is estimation for evolution problem. This algorithm is called 4D VAR. 4D VAR, it's also a specific appellation from the weather forecasting community. They call that 4D VAR because like they look at problem is 3D, and since you have time, it's 4D, okay, and VAR for variational, okay? And they say 4D VAR solve every problem in your life. Actually, Météo France uses the 4D VAR every day to compute the weather, to estimate the weather, and then they launch the model to predict the new weather for the next days, okay? So I could stop there, but actually I will not. And my idea is to show you that you can rethink everything in a different point of view, like in my recursive, with my recursive idea of using the data, the next data, and only the next data when I have it, okay? Why I'm saying that? Because if I change the time, I redo everything. If I give you, if the experimentalists come the next day and say, I have a new data, then you redo your iteration process, okay? So it's like a pity to every day redo something which is more and more difficult to solve because you have more and more data to take into account, okay? And basically the idea behind Kalman estimator is to overcome this problem. Assumption, finite dimension for now, and we will see after what can happen. So A is bounded. It can depend of time, but then it's like bounded with respect to time. Yeah, Cauchy ellipses give you a solution with absolute continuous space. You have everything is linear. You have a unique minimizers, and you write y bar as the unique minimizer. Okay. And this is my definition of Kalman filter. So if you look Kalman filters in Wikipedia, you will find another one. And the idea is to prove you that actually it's the same. But if you think at Kalman as a deterministic stuff, this should be the definition. So Kalman, the idea behind Kalman estimation is to say, and I will show you, that's the most important things to remember actually for the whole lecture. I have y bar from one 4D VAR estimation, but actually y bar depend of the time t if in your criteria you have plus integral over t. This y bar will depend of what you have in your observation, so it will depend of t, okay? And so you can think of the last time of your estimation, and then you say, can you compute that? So this is the definition. Okay, and now with this definition, the idea is to find a nice formula for that. Okay, but that's the spirit. You will find the best estimation at time t using the data up to time t with the same t. Okay, let's use like an illustration. I'm very proud of this illustration, so be nice, please. So this is your 4D var. Oh, wait, comes the. So this is the 4D var in black. This is your target. For example, target trajectory. You start from the wrong initial condition, for example, and you do your 4D var. So forget about the model error. For example, you have like, if you start from a wrong initial condition, you are here, then you do the adjoint, find a new position, iterate, and then you converge. Okay, that's the 4D var. And just let's think about what Kalman means. Kalman means that you start from the initial error. Already nice. And you minimize. Okay, and you end up here because for now you don't have a lot of observation, so there is no reason to converge up to the target trajectory. And Kalman say, okay, what I want is to compute that directly. And then I will increase the number of observations over time, so my 4D var has more and more chances to converge. But Kalman try to go up to the last value directly. Okay? So basically, instead of doing 4 iterations of all the iterations of the 4D var, I will try to find this red trajectory. Okay? And basically, as time goes, I expect my trajectory to be closer and closer to the good trajectory. Okay? If you have any question about that, it's the moment. And not about the figure, because the figure is nice.
So somehow you assume, or you mean that if you are in short time, you are not accurate. You cannot achieve a good estimate.
Yeah, it's exactly the same problem as for the depolymerization. If I use the first moment, the moment of order 0, and I start at the beginning, actually the 4D var stay here, actually, because I have no information at all. But then it will start. So Kalman will first do something like that, no moves, and then we'll start to move. Okay? So to define what is, to find the dynamics behind Kalman, I have to define the covariance operator. So for the people who do stochastics, it's nice because I use the word covariance, which is nice. But actually, okay? But actually it's just a word for me because everything is still deterministic, okay? But I call it covariance. It's like to show you respect, okay? A lot of people in the deterministic world, they call it the Riccati operator, okay? But it's nicer covariance. Okay, so the covariance operator is the solution of the following Riccati dynamics. So you see it's a nonlinear dynamic, so it's an operator. Here A is an operator, C also, so everything is an operator, and it's nonlinear because you have pi and pi here. Okay, you can prove that you have a unique covariance operator in the good space of positive operator. Actually, you can do it in the finite dimensional case. You can do it by Cauchy-Lipschitz because it will be Lipschitz. But most of the proofs are based on the fact that you have your two ends problems, and since everything is linear, you know that there is a transformation that can transform your both end problems as a Cauchy problems. For sure, it exists. It's like for you, it's like when you have a PDE and you try to find the DTN operator to get Neumann on one boundary instead of the Dirichlet. So it's the same, but for time. So you know that this operator should exist, and you try to find it, and you actually find this equation. So basically, you can prove that pi is the transformation that allows you to triangularize this coupled dynamics between the state and the adjoint. So I passed that, but for for you, the important point is that actually you have a solution for that. Infinite dimension. And when you have compute pi, you can, the idea is to prove that the Kalman estimator is given by that. And you recognize the nice structure. You have y dot equal ay. You start from the a priori, so you start from only what you know, and you follow the dynamics, and every time you see a difference between the data and what you can reconstruct from the data, from the trajectory, you correct it by using this operator. So the J, the gain that I talked you about at during the first part of the talk, the J is P C star. Okay? If it's infinite dimension, C star is just like C transpose something. Okay? How do you prove that? Basically, you prove something that is even more fundamental, which is this fundamental identity. You have a link between, for all t between 0 and capital T, you find that the 4D solution is related to the Kalman solution by pi q bar. And it's why pi actually trigonalized the first system. So the idea is to prove that. How do you prove that? Well, you differentiate with respect to time, because everything, you are infinite dimension, everything is easy. You derive with respect to time, you get y dot here, you get y hat dot, q dot, and p dot using the Riccati equation. And you will find that actually you have the same dynamics from the same initial condition, so you have the same solution. Okay? And this is super nice when you look at this equation. It's like really when I have a new, if one day the people from the weather forecasting give you a new observation, I don't redo all the history, I just use it and modify the dynamics with respect to that. And I give you the weather for the new day. Okay? There is actually there is lots of drawbacks, and we will see all the drawbacks in the next minutes. Do you have an idea of of a first drawback? So you have to find the drawbacks, which is in the next slide, which is not so easy. So do you have one idea of one drawback? So you remember my trajectory? So this is the target one. This is what I could have reconstructed with the 4D var up to this time t. And with Kalman, I find something like that. Okay? So what is nice is that actually this guy is the same, but actually I don't have this one. So if you ask me what is the initial condition, I say, actually I don't know. I know that whatever initial condition is, the final condition should be that. Okay? Well, actually, there is a way to reconstruct the initial condition. Basically, you use the adjoint equation and the fundamental identity. You know that from the adjoint, you have y bar at the beginning, but you replace y bar by that, and you find a new dynamics of the adjoint that only depend on the Kalman guy. So when you use this equation, which is an adjoint equation, always well posed, it's A star, okay? Even in infinite dimension, it will be well posed. So you find a way to start from that and to go back with an adjoint physics, so not necessarily, and you will go back there. But in only one iteration, that's the magic of it. I don't do iteration anymore. I do Kalman, and then I go back with the adjoint. Okay? Do you find the drawbacks for that? Yeah.
How far is it limited to a linear equation?
This one is tough. Okay, so yeah, I will discuss that later. But yeah, for the far, for no far, but we will see. Another one, simpler one. The problem is that to compute this dynamics, you need pi of t at every time t, but you are computing that backward in time. But actually, you need the Riccati forward in time to compute, so it can be long, actually, at every time t to build this dynamics. So actually, well, I will skip that, but there is way to rewrite everything in order to also compute this pi, this adjoint equation in a forward situation. So manipulation can give you the initial condition. That's the message, and I will show you an example. So the same problem, actually, here I will start with pretty much the same, but I changed the boundary condition. So it will be periodic boundary condition. So now I don't escape the window. I will, when I go here, I come back there. Okay? Why I do that? Because I'm talking about stuff that are estimated over time, and actually over time, in my first problem, you don't see anything because then you get 0. Okay? So basically, my idea was to show you that. So, yeah, sorry, it's not. So target in blue, simulator mean the wrong one, so you start from a wrong initial condition, and observer mean the Kalman guy. Okay, estimator. Observer and estimator are synonym. Okay, so you start from the red one, but actually the green one converge to the blue one in only one iteration. Okay, no noise, just for magic, so no noise. Huh? Okay, then you put noise and everything here goes like crazy. But okay, it's nice, no? You start from the wrong one, and as soon as you get observability, you reconstruct the blue one. Okay? Next, the depolarization, well, okay, something like that. It works also. Yeah, but actually, yeah. But I see nothing because in like asymptotically, the solution is 0. So I reconstruct 0. I'm very proud of it. But yeah, here I just recover the initial condition. Yeah. Yeah, I will do parameters tomorrow after 2 hours of, no, 1 hour and a half. But if I try to both do the Kalman estimation and reconstruct the initial condition with my formula, you will see that, yep, it works. Meaning, okay, you see, as soon as I'm leaving the window, I get information. Okay, because the observability, when you see moments of this type of solution, the idea is to escape so that you change the shape of the solution. Okay, so you get information when you escape the window, and as soon as you escape, you get information to reconstruct the initial condition. So at the same time, you reconstruct. You understand?
Observations at any time.
Yeah, at every time I get the observation, but one moment. Only one moment, actually, the moment of order 0. Okay, again, it escapes, but in the meantime, you reconstruct. Okay, perfectly. But, okay, perfectly means I cheat. No noise and a Gaussian. Okay, so like for the people who do inverse problems, like this guy is just funny. Okay, you do like regular stuff and with no noise. Okay. But what is nice is actually the algorithm is nice. Okay, so my idea was to show you that there is alternative way to construct, to build solution of inverse problems. Then you add noise and you will get the same type of result as for the least square estimation. Okay? Yeah, not so bad. Kalman in an infinite dimensional context. Okay? So the first problem is what sense do I give to that? Okay, so for that, basically the idea is to generalize what is the exponential of A. So for people who are used to define semigroup, the idea is to define that like this, or more generally to variational to evolution operator, because A can depend of T actually. So then you go to like you start with the first chapter of the PASI, and then you go to the third or the fourth. And basically everything, when you are in an infinite dimensional situation, for people who are not used to that, basically the idea is the only type of equation that you can use is the Duhamel formula, saying that y of t depends of y of 0 with the semigroup somehow, the evolution operator, and plus the variation of the constant somehow, okay? And that's the formula that you are allowed to use, or if you don't want to use that, you have to give a sense to the dynamics in a weak way, okay, by using test function that also depend of time. So you have to give a sense to the Riccati equation now, and now it's hard because you don't have Cauchy-Lipschitz anymore and stuff like that. So basically what we do is to define pi using some kind of Duhamel's formula also, but for the nonlinear, you see the semigroup appears in both sides for the nonlinear term. Okay, so first you will prove that you have a solution in this sense, which is called a mild solution for the Riccati equation. Okay, and when you have this mild equation, you will prove that actually having this solution in this sense corresponds to having the solution in a weak sense. There is also, that's a first way. For people who are really interested, there is also a second way to define the Riccati operator, which is what I call an inherent definition. So, using a specific minimization problem, I will skip that. So basically, just understand that you have to work to define a solution of the Riccati equation. Then you have to find in which space is the Riccati solution. Okay? So it will be symmetric, it will be positive, it may be definite, okay? But actually you can get a little bit more. And what you can prove is that it can be, depending on the property you have on C and B and the initial condition, you can prove that it is either Trask class or Hilbert-Schmidt, okay? Trask class or Hilbert-Schmidt corresponds so that's why I need a separate space, because I need a basis on the space. Trask class means that this is bounded, and Hilbert-Schmidt means that this is bounded. So 1/2 here, not 1/2 here. Okay? And you can prove that when you are Trask class, then you are Hilbert-Schmidt, then you are compact, then you are linear. Okay, and actually there is a very nice result that said that if my initial condition for the Riccati is in, for example, Hilbert-Schmidt, and B étoile is in Hilbert-Schmidt, C étoile is only continuous, then you can prove that you have a mild solution for pi in the Hilbert-Schmidt space. So it's quite a lot of information, and I will try to summarize that by saying, maybe you know what is the very nice property of Hilbert-Schmidt operator? Is that they are associated to a kernel. So so pi is an operator. So if I say, what is that? I can prove that actually, for example, I'm looking at a problem on omega. I will prove that I have something okay, that I can compute the solution of Py by just integrating over the kernel. Okay, so Hilbert-Schmidt is very nice because you have the kernel associated to that. So you have something that represents the operator on the physical space. Okay, let me show you. So basically, you can prove that you have a kernel. Actually, yeah, there is you can even prove that you have a kernel with additional regularity, because you can prove that actually pi comes from the dual, so you will have the possibility to derive the kernel. The kernel will be in H1 and something like that. So let me give you an example with the heat equation. So very nice inverse problems inspired from biology, or not, which is the heat equation. Here I choose to have a very simple model error. Okay, with and I assume that I observe. Sorry, I don't wrote it. I will observe on a small omega the solution. Okay, so I have a heat equation. Heat equation over a domain omega, and I will observe over a small domain omega. Okay, and the idea is again to reconstruct the initial condition. Okay, so in that case, I choose the operator so I can prove that it's Hilbert-Schmidt. So I will have a kernel, and I can find the equation satisfied by the kernel. So I can find the PDE behind the Riccati operator dynamics. And I find this very nice equation where you see that pi, so pi depends of two variables, no? X and x prime. And on pi, you have the heat, the Laplacian, as for the heat equation, plus some things that come from the model error, plus something that correlates information on the observation space. If you look at the Lyon's book from on control from 88, there is a very nice, like, I don't remember, like, in one page he says that, so he actually, he gives very roughly the justification of the existence of this kind of kernel, and he say, it would be nice, so it's nice to have Lyon's to say, it would be nice to prove that actually this equation have a solution without relying on the Riccati operator. I never found any article on that. But you have like a heat equation, but plus a Lipschitz nonlinearity. It could be done, but I didn't find any result on that. Okay, and then okay, and then you show you explicitly write what represent that from your heat equation, and you get that heat equation plus a term, delta here is not a Dirac, it's just the coefficient, and pi is the kernel. So it's the weak form, and the strong form is just that. So you see that you have your heat equation and plus the right-hand side of your model, and you add a new right-hand side that actually corrects your equation by comparing what you are computing with respect to the data. Always the same idea. How do you discretize that? Yeah, but yeah, how did it? Yeah.
If you don't know that pi has a regular solution,
yeah. Yeah. How do you compute that? Okay. The main idea behind the discretization for space and time will be you discretize the criteria, and then you redo all the theory from the discretized. With respect to the discretized criteria. So basically, you choose, for example, the finite element discretization for the operators. You have your dynamics, which correspond to mass plus stiffness equal that. So very simple. And then you write a discretized criteria. So everything is now in a finite dimension space. And you find that the operator is associated to a pi, and pi is given by a Riccati, where everything is the discretized operator. And that, you know that you have a solution because you have, it will be Cauchy-Lipschitz for that, because you are in finite dimension. And finally, yeah, there is a slide missing. And finally, you prove that these converge when H2 tends to 0 to the good solution. Okay, so you can do the numerical analysis of that. Okay, since we are at the discretized level, and I already show you the answer, we can understand with, this is the final equation that you will get on M. So I discretize just with respect to space. I will show you afterwards what is when you discretize with respect to time. But if you look at that, what you understand is actually in pi, the resulting matrix in pi is dense. And that is something that I just don't talk about for like 1 hour, okay? Saying that everything is super nice. In one iteration, I can do the estimation, but for that, I need to compute a matrix which is dense, okay? So for every people who do numerical analysis, meaning that you have 1,000 of degrees of freedom, my matrix is 1,000 square, dense, okay? 1 million square, dense. Okay, so not nice, actually. Okay, so we will have to do something, and basically the idea is to, we are working on a new project with François Allouge to try to use the hierarchical matrix representation because we have proved that we have a kernel associated to the solution. Let me show you a 1D example. In 1D, everything is nice because I have like 1,000 degrees of freedom, so I can still use MATLAB. Okay, target solution, and I observe in the blue zone. Okay, target solution, then state estimation, I will start from that. So target, and then state. Okay, you see that in time, I converge to actually something which is close to 0, which is, so it's normal. Okay. But remember, sorry, I can also rebuild the initial condition and check in very few iterations, I rebuild the initial condition, okay? Because like asymptotically, everything is 0, so I can use 0 as a good estimation, okay? But so what is difficult is to rebuild the initial condition, okay? And remember, I'm cheating. No noise, everything is smooth. So I'm just inverting the heat equation, actually. So everything is fine. And so hopefully I don't have any noise, and the initial condition is a smooth one, okay? Otherwise you will get some blow up of the noise, okay? But my idea was, again, to show you that this will give you asymptotically the same result as the least square estimation. Exactly. Not like approximately, exactly, in one iteration. Yeah, okay, synchronize. This one is synchronized, it's better.
Now what happens if you put some noise?
The same as for every least square estimation of the heat equation. So not good, okay? But then, but then all the same techniques works. So you will have to project on the regular space, okay, of a few modes, for example, to reconstruct, and then you will get information. Yeah, you see? Like in 3 iterations, you get the initial condition. Okay, because all the information is concentrated at the first time step. Okay, because then there is nothing to see anymore. Okay? So H matrix, maybe you know what is the H matrix. So in life, just before, when you are in school, like we had two type of matrix, like sparse matrix and dense matrix. So H matrix, you combine sparse in pink, zero matrix like green, low rank matrix in blue, and you see the rank in this square, and dense matrix in red. Okay? And the idea is to prove when you have a structure behind the matrix, like you have a kernel, and you know that the kernel, when you have points that are quite far, have some property of decreasing property, then you say it's not necessary, maybe it's not a good idea to store all the elements. Maybe I can replace all the elements by like a big matrix here. So here you will see the shape of the kernel, and you will see that actually it can be represented by something which is very cheap, which is like a low rank matrix, and the rank diminished over time. Do you have an idea of why the rank diminishes over time for my operator? So basically this pi operator, see how stuff are correlated between each other. Do you have an idea of why this correlation can be represented by a low rank operator? Because when you go over time, the idea is that the heat equation just gives you information on the first mode, because everything is like decreasing so fast that actually you keep only the first mode. Okay, so basically you can prove that all the information is stored on this mode, and so at the end you have a like very simple. What is nice with this H matrix formulation is that we test it for 1 million degrees of freedom, so this matrix is 1 million square. And you can continue to represent it on MATLAB. And then you have the evolution over time. So without, like, by being stupid, so without knowing that it will be of reduced order form, I can compute it like brute force, and I get the information that actually the kernel has a specific structure, which is quite nice. Yeah, okay, so the wrong slide should be before. You can prove that actually it converges with respect to H. That's the finest thing. Okay, so spatial discretization, now you know that it's possible. So time discretization, now you do the same. So since you need something which is a time discrete, a discrete time model, so you write everything like that. So phi here mean phi n plus 1 knowing n is like the semigroup, the discrete semigroup from n to n plus 1. Okay, so it's an approximation of the exponential AT over delta t. You can choose a backward layer, forward layer, something which is actually stable, otherwise you get a wrong model here. And then you write a criteria at the discretized level. So everything, you replace the integral by just sum, and you do again the same machinery, and you get your 2n's problem with respect to the discrete variable. So it's not t anymore, it's n, but you have your 2n problems. Okay, so 2n problems, same proof. And then you define the Kalman time discrete estimator by that. You are looking at the estimator indexed by n, which give you the estimator from the least square estimation up with the criteria up to time n, up to iteration n. And you define it like that. And you will find that to compute that, you have to solve this algorithm. And actually in this algorithm, you see somehow the Riccati equation split it into 2 steps. And that's very nice. The first step is called correction, and the second step is called prediction. So you see, when I start from my initial, a priori, and then if I have a data at this first iteration, I use it to modify the a priori with some gain. Exactly as with my experimentalist guy, when he gives me a new observation, I do a correction, and it's exactly the same, actually, the same operator. That's why I developed the first slide, actually. So my course is well done. Yeah, thank you very much. So it's exactly the same operator. And then, since you are something that involves in time, you involve in time from one time step. And then you get a new observation, you correct. You predict, you correct. You move forward, you correct, you move forward, you correct, you move forward. Okay, splitting algorithm, where you so you have your iteration like that. Dynamics, observation. Dynamics, observation. Dynamics, etc. And the Riccati actually is also splitted. So like a correction for the pi n using only the observation operator. You see C, here only C. And then a dynamic, a prediction term where you use only phi and b. Okay? So that's the Kalman, that's the so-called Kalman estimator. So the Kalman algorithm from the 60s is that. And you see that I never use stochasticity. Okay? And so you use this algorithm for your heat equation by just choosing a specific discretized parameter, and then you prove at the end that you converge. Okay, so for you, it's just for you. Like 5 minutes on nonlinear optimal estimation. So is it as easy for nonlinear optimal estimation? No, for everyone actually, but since Vincent asked. So yeah, the same, but okay, so now I will stay finite dimensional because it's non-linear, so I can't do all the difficulty in the same time. Okay, actually I can't do all the difficulty together, so it's good that I use in a finite dimensional situation. Okay, and now my discrepancy is J. And what you can prove actually is that, so basically you introduce what is called a cost to come, which is that you minimize J with a constraint which is the final point. Okay? So it's like optimal control, but reversely, because you don't compute you compute the cost to come, so you fix the final point and you compute the minimization with respect to final point. When you introduce that, you can prove that this guy follow Hamilton-Jacobi-Bellman equation in the and you can give it a sense in the viscosity sense if the dynamics is Lipschitz. And from this Hamilton-Jacobi equation, you can prove that actually you have exactly the same structure as before, as for Kalman. So you have the dynamics plus something that integrates only the observation. So remember, this guy is d minus cy. And here you have the Hessian of the cost to come. Okay, so nice for the regularity, actually. But so if you can prove, if you manage to prove that you have enough regularity, then you compute the Hessian, and this generalize what you get in your pi operator. And actually, in the linear case, you can prove that the cost to come is directly computed from the Riccati solution as like some kind of parabolic solution where the coefficient is given by pi. So super nice because before I had the Riccati equation on so like dense operator over 1,000,000 of degrees of freedom, and now I have a cost to come, so like something a AGB equation. So you solve AGB on the space Y. So for PD, it's super easy because this guy is the dimension of this guy is 1 million. R power 1 million. Okay, so I did it in dimension 2, and it works. Okay, so for the pendulum it works very nicely. Okay, for the heat equation there is still some challenges, but from an abstract point of view it exists. Actually, I worked so just to. You can do it from the discrete point of view, and I work a lot on proving that actually there is a way to discretize the cost to come in order to then to have the exact counterpart of the Kalman filter, but for nonlinear situation. Okay, I will skip that. So since it's impossible to apply this equation, what are people doing? What they do for nonlinear system is that they decided to replace the Riccati equation by a new Riccati where they use the tangent of all the nonlinear operators instead of the linear operators. Okay? So they compute that. It's completely heuristic. Okay? And we will discuss tomorrow if there is some kind of meaning behind that. But the idea was that. Okay? And on after discretization, it will be that. So it exists, that it's called extending Kalman filter. It's like 60s also. There are people who say, yeah, my code is very complicated, so I don't want to compute a tangent of an operator. If there is a way to find formulas without computing tangent. And actually, yeah, there is a nice algorithm where you can replace all the tangent that you see there by stencils. So stencils mean computation on particles. But actually, yeah, I say particles, but since I'm not stochastic, particles just mean point where you compute the operator, and then you combine the point in order to find a way to replace that. So it's really like finite difference, but in R6 or R7, or depending of the dimension of your system, or R1 million. So basically, it's based on the fact that if you use some kind of if you give you some point like this, there is a way to compute, and you have a nonlinear transformation of this point, then you can find the mean value of this nonlinear combination by regrouping adequately the particles. And then you get what we call the unscented Kalman filter. So unscented Kalman filter is a deterministic filter. Even if the guy who invented it said that it's a stochastic one, there is no stochasticity in that. It's like just changing stencils with everything. Okay. So, and actually this one is very nice because you don't have to compute tangent. So you just compute particles, you regroup information, and you compute the next step. And we will show you with Jean-Frédéric a nice application of this algorithm when you have like complex problem like the one that Jean-Frédéric told you about this afternoon. We are almost done. So, you know, 4D var, okay, nice, but not very original. Works in every situation, okay, but who cares? Kalman, very nice, but actually quite difficult to compute, okay? And then Kalman in nonlinear situation, very, very difficult to compute. So you can use approximated Kalman version, okay, for now not justified, and we will see tomorrow how we can justify them. And since I show you that for the Kalman, for the heat equation, the idea is that everything is reduced, actually the final kernel corresponds to actually something which is of low rank. The last idea about this least square sequential method is to use what we call reduced order decomposition. So basically the idea is to define P as a low rank operator. So you have a projector L here. And basically you use this and that, you put it into the Riccati in order to find equation for L and U. Okay, if B equal to 0, you find this very simple equation, which is very nice. If you say that what you want to do is only parameter identification, maybe you can say that the reduction will be only on the parameters. And if you do that only on the parameters, you find even more simple formula for this L and U. So L corresponds to L state and L parameter. And actually you can find, since you don't have any dynamics on the parameter, you find very nice formula. When B is not 0, it's more complicated, but you can also do it. The idea behind that is that you prove at the end that you minimize, that this problem minimizes the functional also, but here the functional, the uncertainty on your initial condition is projected onto the reduced space. So basically you are not minimizing over all the uncertainty, your problem, but you're minimizing over only the uncertainty that you choose. So for the heat equation, what I could have done is to say, let's forget about the H matrix, use that, and say that the uncertainty is only on the first mode. Okay, and do the same. And I will reconstruct also an initial condition which is projected on the first mode. And you will be very, you will find that the result is very nice because I start from a Gaussian, so with the first mode it's okay. Okay, but then if I start from something like that, then it's not as nice. And then I need more modes, okay, but for the heat equation, like with like 10 or 100 modes, it will be perfect for most of the initial conditions that you are looking at. Okay, and for the parameter, this also is very nice because you can prove that actually you show that actually you are solving what people call a need identification problem, which is you minimize only on the parameter space. Okay, and we will see tomorrow what you have. Okay, so I have 1 minute to say 1 minute is okay. Stochasticity, okay. So very fast, the idea is to, again, give a sense to that, but in a stochastic context. So basically, the nice book for that is the book from Bensoussan about time filtering. Okay, Bensoussan is like, for me, is the father of all what I have explained here. And so 70s, huh? So like... So it's nice to see that there is nothing between, and basically just to show you, the idea is that when you see, if you look at Kalman in Wikipedia, you will find that. Okay, so Kalman for the linear case, you will find that. You will find that the initialization, y0, is exactly the mean value, the mean value of your initial condition. So the a priori is the mean value of all the initial conditions that you can think of with respect to the knowledge that you have. And the covariance operator are exactly covariance operator. And then this guy, so the correction correspond to estimated y when you use the observation up to time n. And the prediction is you predict n plus 1 up to time n also. So here you have this kind of splitting between using the observation up to time n, then you predict, then you reuse the new observation. That's why you have the splitting who appears. Okay? And so the idea is that you can rethink all what I have explained in this sense. Okay? The nonlinear case works also, exists also. It's called you can use it's called particle filtering actually, and you can use Monte Carlo from simulation to compute them, and you can relate the results of the particle filtering approach. In the linear case, you find exactly the same equations. Okay, that's why I use a deterministic presentation, because there is no benefit to define stochasticity for the linear case. In the nonlinear case, actually, it's better because you get more information. What you can prove in the nonlinear case is that actually the estimator with the stochastic framework converge when epsilon tends to 0. So converge asymptotically to the cost to come version with like small noises. It's like a paper from Barras-Bensoussan at the end of the 70s. And so my the UKF algorithm actually in the same years, so in the late 90s, when the UKF was defined by Julier et al., there is a guy called Evensen who defined what we call an ensemble Kalman filter, which is pretty much the same formulas as before, but he used more particles than the particle in the UKF. And since he uses more particles, he said that he have enough particles to get more than just stencils. So we get like sort of voie des grands nombres. Actually, it's wrong because there is not enough particles. And but the algorithm is the same. And actually, this algorithm, so we use the UKF in all the world simulation, but the ensemble Kalman filter is like the most used algorithm, the algorithm the most used for the climate and weather forecasting community. Thank you very much.